There's an important topic that I'd like to discuss a little bit. I plan to write an article about it, but while it was fresh in my mind and I spent the day thinking about this, I wanted to talk a little bit about it because there are many ideas that have come into our minds through modern schools and modern education that are simply false and they cause a lot of trouble. Maybe they sound good when our children are young and they seem to make sense to us, but ultimately they end up hurting our children and getting in the way of their education. Now, the issue that I'd like to talk about in this video is the discussion of learning styles. You'll hear people say things like, I'm a visual learner, or I'm this kind of learner, or I'm this kind of learner. And we have this theory that students have different styles of learning. Um, Now, I'm not going to judge whether or not that's true. That may very well be true, that different children, as different individuals, have different abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, and so on. In fact, that's pretty obvious. But the issue that I'm concerned with is that when we talk about Catholic education, and specifically classical Catholic education, and listen to this carefully, there's only one way to study. There's only one way to study. And so, while we can talk about different learning styles, if we're interested in a classical Catholic education, there's only one learning style that's possible. And I'll explain. When we talk about learning styles in these modern discussions, what we never talk about is what needs to be learned. We don't talk about that first. We don't establish a curriculum first. We don't lay out all of the subjects and all of the content that needs to be learned. Because if we do that, especially for the classical Catholic curriculum, if we lay out all of the content that needs to be studied, what we're going to find is there's only one way to study it. There's only one way. Now, there's a few reasons why I say this. First of all, in the classical Catholic curriculum, there is so much content. There's so much content. There are just courses and courses and books, none of which can be taken out or neglected. There's just so much content in a classical Catholic education. That's the first issue. The second issue is that it costs money to do things in different ways. If I say, I'm a visual learner, I learn by, I like to watch videos, I like to see things, that sounds great. And again, that may be true. It may be true that someone is a quote-unquote visual learner. The problem is that the classical Catholic curriculum is never going to be turned into a video series. Never. It's impossible. There's just too much content. So the different learning styles, number one, don't all allow students to progress through the content of the classical Catholic curriculum. And secondly, different learning styles come with different price tags attached to them. And it's just not possible for students to work through the content of the classical Catholic curriculum in a certain way without there being significant financial consequences that make it impossible. So this issue of learning styles is, as I said, it sounds nice when we're just sitting around a coffee table, just talking it up with no thought of consequences or costs or the actual curriculum content. We can say anything we want in those conversations. But when it comes down to the actual work of progressing through the actual curriculum that's recommended to us by wise men and saints from the past, we're going to find that there's only one way to learn. And these different learning styles, again, while they may be true, make sure you hear me when I say I'm not denying that such things may be true, but it's irrelevant because the content will only be learned by students who learn to study the one way possible for classical Catholic studies. Now, what is that way? Surely we have to get into the question of what that way is. And it's pretty simple. First of all, in Catholic learning, Catholic learning is different because we, as Catholics, we believe in authority. When I was a Protestant, I remember pastors and teachers and authors always acting like they were on the front line of this movement discovering the truth about everything, that they were the source of the truth. They were the one through whom the truth was being revealed by their new book or their new conference, their lecture, and so on. It was always this idea that I am God's spokesman, I'm the prophet through whom God is speaking, and therefore, you need to listen to me because I'm revealing the truth. Well, in Catholicism, that's not how it works. We have 2,000 years of established tradition, not just in theology, but in all subjects, in all of the philosophical disciplines, in all of the 7 liberal arts, in all subjects, and in theology, in sacred scripture, everything. We have 2,000 years of developed doctrine that's been studied and taught and written systematically by the greatest minds and most gifted men and women in the history of the world. And so Catholic education is different than non-Catholic education, where everyone is still trying to figure out what's true or trying to suppress the truth in unrighteousness, as St. Paul says in Romans chapter 1, trying to actually create a sense of confusion or agnosticism, as if the truth can't be known. So Catholic education is different. When we consider how Catholics should learn and study, it's different than how others can study. And that's one of the reasons why it's so unfortunate that Catholic schools have followed the philosophy of modern education. Because modern education doesn't start with an established curriculum and then ask how to study and teach it. It starts with confusion and chaos, and then starts talking about schooling methods and teaching methods and study methods, and it's just all craziness, just all talk in the air with no actual foundation or root to grow from. Catholic education is different. The truth is already established. We're not prophets in the sense that God is speaking and revealing new things through us. Revelation, as far as the knowledge of God is concerned, is finished. It was finished in the time of the apostles and is simply explained through history in the church. Now, without going into that too much, Catholic studies are different. We're learning an established and organized body of knowledge that extends across all subjects and courses. The most efficient way to learn as a Catholic, and this gets people upset in modern times, the most efficient way to learn as a Catholic is through memorization. Why? Because our truth, the truth that's been revealed to the world through the Catholic Church, has already been organized and systematized and written in the most efficient ways possible by the wisest and best men and women in history. You can't, if you put Catholic truth into your own words, you're going to make it worse than it already is in the writings of the doctors and saints of the church. And that's why all of this talk about how rote memorization is so bad and how we need to understand things and say it in our own words. And so you're not going to say anything in your own words that you don't make worse and more unclear by doing so. The most efficient way to study as a Catholic is through memorization. And that's a sort of a logical consequence of the reality that we are a people who inherit a tradition of learning. And again, not just theology, not just liturgy. It's philosophical learning. It's learning in the 7 liberal arts. We inherit so much in Catholic tradition, much of which modern Catholics don't know anything about because these subjects are simply not studied. We inherit so much, and it's so masterfully composed and prepared for us that there's no way to study more efficiently than to just memorize it. And that, you'll find, is the only way to study and pursue the wisdom of a classical Catholic education. That's why you see the old teachers used to work to present the truth in catechetical form, in questions and answers, simple memory work. There's no more efficient way. There's no more efficient way. I remember when I had boys here studying with me in a private school setting, one of the boys one day came to me with a lesson. I forget what subject it was, but he came to me and he asked me if I could take the lesson and turn it into catechetical form for him because it was easier to study by memorization. Once you get a taste for memorization and you get your mind in shape and you see how much you can learn and progress through by simply memorizing what wise men have already written, you'll see that there's no better way to study. And so to get back to the original subject, while it may be true that different individuals have different styles of learning, what I can tell you is that if you don't learn how to memorize and commit to memorizing, you will never be able to learn enough material efficiently enough to make significant progress in a classical Catholic education. You don't need to put it in your own words. You don't need to, as they say, understand it as if there's any better way to understand the truth than to memorize it in the most perfectly spoken form that it can be made in, which is how most of Catholic teaching is available to us in 2021. There may be different styles of learning, but there's only one way to study in a classical Catholic curriculum, and that's through the study and memorization and recitation of the works of the master teachers in Catholic history. I hope that's helpful. God bless.